military parade, and all of a sudden something happens. Can you describe what happened, what went through your minds, and the best you can just kind of relive, I guess, that nightmare?
All the security was called off in the front.
They didn't.
Probably the biggest concern I had was after the actual gunfire was over, and there'd been a moment of quiet there, which we let run for a minute or two. Then we got up, and when our Egyptian officer friend wasn't there, because this was the first time that Dot and I had been anywhere in the vicinity of this particular area of Cairo, we had no idea which way to go to the hotel. So my greatest concern then, and I guess overall, was that I was in a very confused situation, and without anyone that I could depend on to give me any guidance. That I didn't know exactly what would be taking place, how we could find our way back to the hotel, what means there might be. I think that was my major concern, that we were in a very, very turbulent, upset situation without any particular means to cope with it.
This day, while I was sick and in the hospital, they let me out. That's perfect. So you see, when
maintenance man out here, and the other inmate, along with James Walker, the inmate who takes care of
the church with Hope Baptist, his wife, and I went through the river.
Come out here some 30 years now, that we get more out of it than the fellows that are inmates out here. We've made some good friends with those fellows, and they have been a blessing to us.
Patco.
Montgomery Patco President C.J. Favre spends some of his time these days at Patco headquarters. Some of his time is spent traveling, talking with other union officials and members. But like many air traffic controllers, he says he can't stay unemployed much longer. He says he and many other controllers have been living off their savings, and the bills are beginning to catch up. Favre says over half the local controllers have already taken on some sort of employment, whether part or full-time, but Favre says many potential employers are hesitant to hire Patco members.
That they don't want to hire someone full-time and get them started into training them for some other profession, and then whenever this is settled, to have them quit and go back to work for the FAA.
Favre says when the call does come for the controllers to return to the towers, they'll still follow union decisions.
Oh yes, yeah, we'll go back eventually, but it's either people will get their jobs back on the appeals procedures. Well, we'll be called back because the system is deteriorating and the weather is coming in. The biggest time period for the aviation industry is approaching with the holidays.
Favre says as of yet, local controllers have been unable to draw unemployment compensation. There are legal questions concerning their eligibility. Favre says the Federal Aviation Administration is making the going even tougher by foreclosing on home loans to controllers who were on the job less than a year before the strike. But Favre says if local union members could erase all that's happened in the past months and return to their jobs under the same conditions they left under, few, if any, would do so. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
How does the public treat the Patco?
Right now, it's still uncertain as to who may have started the incident. We're preparing a grand jury case where an investigation will be conducted by the Montgomery County Grand Jury, naming Early McWilliams as the one who is accused of actually firing the shots at Jack Jones. That's going to be referred to the Montgomery County Grand Jury for their consideration as to whether or not he actually committed any crime or what.
Well, I feel a little frustrated, but we tried as hard as we could, and they were a good team. They were able to come back, when they needed to, and it's just
some kind of quarterback can make those two plays. Huh?
Oh yeah, for sure. They just came back when they needed to, and really there wasn't anything we could do about it. So, I guess they're a better ball team.
What do you do now?
Just got to work harder this next week and get out to Florida.
Mississippi State had a good defense and a good offense, and they showed a lot of class in coming back and scoring that last touchdown. They deserve to win, if they're going to display that kind of class.
Bob, you've been around a long time. Do you think this is going to hurt this team the rest of the way?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll be able to bounce back, just learn from it, and try to beat Florida.
We didn't get that last first down there. It was real close. And I don't know, it's just one of those things.
George, you all have had 2 losses like this, Tennessee and now this one. Do you worry that this will take the steam out of this team?
Nah, ain't no way to take the steam out. We just gotta, start all over next week.
We're just gonna group back together next week and, just get ready to play Florida next week.
We just got to get up in the morning, go to church, thank the good Lord for our healthy bodies, and then we got to get out there money and get after it again.
We've been through it before. Happened to us last year, and we were so close to it again today. And we have to make the other guys realize that it can be used in a positive way, and not let it be negative toward us. Make it be a stepping stone. Come back and work that much harder.
Earlier this year, the Teachers Retirement System Board of Control voted to sue the governor, state finance director, and the legislature for allegedly not following an established formula for determining the retirement system's financial needs. The suit also centers on the legislature's decision to scratch out the word estimated from the appropriation, which Bronner says is the key to providing flexibility to a formula which is based on estimates and not hard figures. Today, Bronner said the figures measuring how close their estimations of August were show the legislature overfunded the teachers' retirement system by $3.2 million. Bronner says a poll of some of the TRSA board members show they want to pursue that suit.
Because the basis of the suit was not either an overfunding or an underfunding, as much as it was simply that the procedure that the legislature established to fund the teachers' retirement system was not being followed.
And as far as the extra $3.2 million?
Now, since they put it in hard numbers, there's nothing that I can do with it. I can't turn it back because the legislature says you will get that. So the ball's back now in that court, simply saying that you either have to put the word estimated back in or you need to reduce the appropriation by that amount.
Bronner says yet another option is to apply that extra $3.2 million to a $900 million unfunded accrued liability to the teachers' retirement systems. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Vocational Rehabilitation Service officials and blind vendor management personnel from all over Alabama were at the meeting. Representing their interest is State Representative Euclid Raines from DeKalb, who is also blind. Raines reiterated the state law that gives the blind preference in vending contracts at state schools. However, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled 3 weeks ago that the law does not give blind vendors an absolute right to the vending contracts. The court split 6-3 on the issue and said the University of Alabama didn't violate the 1955 law when it adopted a policy that prevented blind operators from getting a vending contract in 1977. The Vocational Rehabilitation Service, acting through its Business Enterprise Program, sought to obtain a vending site in the Law Center on the Tuscaloosa campus through a contract bid. However, Raines says the university rejected the bid because the school's policy required blind vendors to pay the same commission as commercial vendors. But by law, blind vendors are excluded from paying commissions. The vendors say the court's decision results in unfair competition between themselves and large commercial vending companies. Meanwhile, Raines says unless the Supreme Court ruling is reversed, additional decisions could come as a result, and that would mean disaster for all blind Alabamians who earn a living in the vending business. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Power company attorney Rod Monday was granted an extended 45 minutes to argue his case. Monday began the hearing criticizing the commission's zero order, saying it was not based on the evidence, was issued without consideration of the PSC staff and Attorney General's recommendation, and will cause, quote, utter disaster for the company. Monday used several exhibits during his portion of the 2.5-long hearing, explaining past and future equity earnings. The exhibits showed what Monday called a dramatic decline in investment earnings. Monday also said says the company isn't earning any return on its $800 million investment for Unit 2 of the Farley nuclear power plant, which went into commercial production in July. Monday ended his presentation saying the increased request wasn't unreasonable at all and bonds should be granted in order for the company to carry out what Monday called fine business of electricity for its customers. Then, a representative for the Attorney General's office, Wendell Cawley, stood before the justices supporting the PSC's order. Cawley told the justices the AG's office is being deluged with letters and complaints following its $230 million increase recommendation, which was later re-evaluated and changed. And Senior Citizens Representative Charles C. also supported the Commission's order and urged the justices to deny the company's request.
There is the concomitant right in the people of this state to the use and enjoyment of absolute necessities without the extraction of oppressive and prohibited rates.
The Supreme Court took all arguments under advisement and is expected to render a decision within the next few weeks. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Supreme Court.
The former governor recounted several stories when he was a state employee and different experiences he had while campaigning for governor and president. Wallace said his first job with the state was a truck driver, earning 30 cents for an 11-hour day. Wallace says there's been many good changes for state employees. One of the best things to ever happen in state government was the implementation of the merit system.
I would not have want to have been governor with having to fill every position in state government from the lowest to the highest paid employee from the governor's office. That would, of course, kept the governor doing full-time work of employment. And I can remember as a little boy going to Montgomery with my father and 50 other people to help get a young man a job as a rodman with the highway department. That was how political state employment was in those days. That a great delegation would go from a little town of Clow to try to help a young man, 18 or 19 years of age, get a $60 a month rodman's job with the highway department. I'm so glad those days are gone forever.
Wallace drew applause from the crowd when he told them he was not ready to retire and no one was going to decide for him when to quit work. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
How many days notice? Well, I think they were mailed on the 5th, but we are off. That you have no objection to the taking of depositions in an impeachment matter. The head of our criminal division, I guess now would be Don Valesky. He has no knowledge that you would like to be notified some reasonable period of time. The court, who have duties to their respective interests, could simply by communicating. They said it on Saturday thinking they were going, that whoever wanted to come could come on Saturday, and we say they got the tenant personally. I can't imagine the Attorney General of the state.
Dr. Randolph says he needs additional time to study and gain more insight before addressing some of the university's problems, but he did speak to the issue of accreditation by suggesting that ASU have higher internal standards than those established by the outside world.
I reject assertions that the public, through its elected or appointed representatives, has no right to question the efficacy of publicly supported programs. It has every right. Alabama State has and will continue to present itself for review by its fellow citizens. And exercising its scholarly responsibility, I would hope the university faculty will continue its efforts to improve the review instruments.
Dr. Randolph says he's recruited 2 friends, a resident of a commercial bank and an executive with the Digital Equipment Corporation, to give the faculty advice on how to improve ASU's internal standards. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Alleging certain actions in the jail. Copy of the law
regarding the pay range and directed that the two positions be assigned at the commission at this time. Take no action as the matter would have to be resolved through the law enforcement process. Mr. Robert Bryant, Mrs. Anita Armstrong Morgan, and Captain T.L. Payne presented a request by memorandum to the administrator for the establishment of a specified.
If you've tried to buy or sell a house recently, you've probably found that it's not a simple procedure. Sure, there are plenty of houses on the market, but that's not the problem. The problem is money, and lots of it. To buy a house, you must take out a loan or a mortgage, and most people these days can't afford a conventional mortgage because interest rates are soaring at 17 to 18%.
Money is available to finance a new home. It's just that it's very expensive, and people are finding it very difficult to qualify. In that investors require certain parameters on income and debt. And at 17.5% and 16.5% interest rate, it's just very difficult for most people to qualify at these rates.
While realtors say the housing market is fairly active, Cantrell says housing starts are off tremendously. He says in Montgomery County for the first 9 months of this year, there were only 198 single-family housing starts compared to 517 for just 6 months in 1980. Cantrell predicts the high interest rates and lack of new home starts will cause a housing shortage in the future. But things aren't all that bad. Realtors say older homes are selling well. That's because most have existing mortgages and an owner willing to do almost anything to sell. One term realtors and lenders use a lot these days is creative financing, and it means exactly that, coming up with various ways to enable a person to buy a home. I'll have more on those in my next report. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
But if you want to hypothetically move that qualifying time to 3 o'clock this afternoon, and if I were, my present state of mind would be that my name would be on it at 3 o'clock this afternoon. But I reserve the right to change my mind.
At this point, it's unlikely that Camp will change his mind. He says it's no secret that he's been particularly interested in the lieutenant governor's seat, but right now, Camp says he's concentrating primarily on doing the job he was elected to do. Camp isn't a political tenderfoot. He was press secretary for former Governor George Wallace for 8 years. He regards Wallace as a close personal friend. So, will his former boss run for governor?
It is my guess at this time that Governor Wallace very likely will be a candidate for governor.
Kemp says it's too early to start campaigning, although several issues do come to mind, like the future of education, industry in Alabama, and high interest rates. He's also concerned with the relationship between the governor and lieutenant governor's office. Kemp believes there should be a harmonious relationship, and if Kemp and Wallace are on next year's ticket and are elected, that relationship may become a reality. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
And I think that's an example.
Been filled at this time. That position previously had all the major instances going on today in corrections. Beg pardon? Solid. I feel that we will establish more accountability because we have lessened the span of supervision and areas of responsibility of individuals. Rather than 3 deputy commissioners as in the past, we now have 5 division directors who will be able to more closely scrutinize the activities within this department.
I certainly support the AVACs. They will not be delivered for another 4 or 5 years. I don't particularly like the Saudi government, but I like them much better than the government that will follow them. I want stability in the Persian Gulf. The AVACs and the prospect of the AVACs might strengthen that stability slightly. But there is one very important point. I am definitely and completely pro-Israel. There are more than 200 big nuclear electricity generating plants in the free world. There were accidents, like 3 Mile Island, that cost lots of money. None of them killed a man. None of them hurt the health of a single individual. That is an unparalleled health safety record. Now, I know there are some people who disagree with me, but I claim that I am a better actor than Jane Fonda is a nuclear engineer. To an increasing extent, nuclear weapons can be used for defensive purposes, not to cause damage, but to defend. The neutron bomb is an excellent means to stop a conventional attack. We are also working on weapons to stop incoming missiles. I think the nuclear weapons have come of age, and that means they are no longer essentially for destruction. They are for real defense.
During that time, the council has made, a year ago, the council brought together vocational teachers.
My judgment, that's somewhat questionable as to whether or not an appointed body ought to.
Lieutenant J.D. Foster, head of the Crimes Against Property Bureau of the Montgomery Police Department, says most of the stolen merchandise came from houses that were burglarized on the southeast side of Montgomery. Lieutenant Foster says the arrest of Manley was a combined effort by several investigators in his bureau.
Approximately a year and a half ago, I had burglarized a lot of houses in Carrollville and Carriage Hills area. He'd been sentenced to, of all things, 6 months in jail and had an early release of 4 months. His MO and patterns fit Manley. Then we also received an additional information that some jewelry had been sold. And of course, the investigators picked him up, and upon questioning him, found that this was so. And through his information, we did other investigations at some local nightclubs and found some of the stolen property.
Lieutenant Foster says that Manley was just released from prison the first part of September. Police say cases will be prepared and sent to the Montgomery County grand jury in connection with 7 possible co-defendants on charges of receiving stolen property. Manley is being held in the Montgomery City Jail without bond. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
We've made improvements over the years, but we're not satisfied.
What are some of the areas that you're maybe not satisfied with right now? Not satisfied with?
Well, I think, we identified some problems in the drug area, particularly with the hearings, and the Secretary has issued a strong policy statement that particularly marijuana use is not acceptable in the Air Force. We've also put out recently a policy statement on sexual harassment. To define what sexual harassment is, that's, I think, been a lot of the problem, is people didn't know what it was, and so they put out a strong policy statement in that area, which covers both civilian and military personnel. He's put out a strong policy statement on equal opportunity for both military and civilian. So those are the kinds of things we've been working on lately.
I find it strange because you say they issued a policy statement on, like, marijuana, the use of drugs and so forth, and I would think that would be automatically something that you know when you went into the Air Force. You weren't allowed to smoke marijuana, first of all, because it's illegal.
Yes, that's exactly true, but I think one of the things we have to recognize that we're recruiting people from a society that has used marijuana, although they're told that and have to sign a statement that...
In this reorganization, I feel that we will establish more accountability because we have lessened the span of supervision and areas of responsibility of individuals. Rather than 3 deputy commissioners as in the past, we now have 5 division directors who will be able to more closely scrutinize the activities within this department.
Police say the investigation into the burglary centered on Manley after a number of the break-ins fit his alleged method of operation. Lieutenant J.D. Foster, head of the Crimes Against Property Bureau of the Montgomery Police Department, says Manley was released from prison in September after serving 4 months on burglary charges. Lieutenant Foster says some of the $70,000 worth of stolen goods were sold to performers and patrons of a Montgomery nightclub, and additional charges could be filed in the case.
Additional cases against individuals for receiving stolen property will be presented to the grand jury.
Manley is currently being held without bond in Montgomery City Jail. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
The play in question came at 2.5 minutes left in the game. Auburn leading 17-14, and the Tigers trying to draw Mississippi State offsides on 4th down and 2 at midfield. If they succeed, a first down will allow Auburn to run the clock out. State jumping around, then the ball snapped. The linesman, George Morris, calls Auburn for an illegal snap and a live ball penalty at that, not a dead ball foul. So rather than an automatic 5-yard penalty against Auburn, Mississippi State gets the all-important option, penalty or take the play. They, of course, took the play, got the ball on downs. Only problem there was that after taking the play, which saw Hobby, the quarterback, tackled at about the Auburn 49-yard line, they put the ball back at the State 49, which the next play clearly shows. 5 plays later, Mississippi State scored and won the game.
You know, it doesn't make any difference what my opinion is. The game's over with, and it's history now, and we're looking forward to playing Florida.
All right, how about Florida?
Well, they got a great football team. They got a lot of talent, offensively and defensively. I think, you know, I still think that defensively is probably the strong part of that football team. They've got tremendous speed and quickness, well coached and aggressive, get around the football and give you a lot of problems. Real versatile. They've got great quarterbacks in Hugo and Peace. Peace probably start against us. They got a big running back and Jones that is 235, I guess. Great receivers. Tyrone Young, 6'6", can jump over the world and catch football, and you know, we'll have to be the best we can be to have a chance, just like it's been every week.
Just going to stay that way.
But I think we got a chance.
Catherine Kolb's address to a gymnasium full of high school and junior college students was entitled "A Day in the Life of a Hostage." Ms. Kolb, who is 43, told the students that prayer during her ordeal kept her going. After answering questions from students, Ms. Kolb met with reporters. She talked about her daily routine of reading, exercising, and praying, along with Ann Swift, the other female hostage. Ms. Kolb says she and Ms. Swift were never allowed to see the 50 male hostages, and they did not know how the men were being treated. The former hostage says each day she lived with fear of being put on trial as a spy, with the ultimate possibility of being executed. She says threats of such actions were made many times by her captors.
If death was what was going to happen, okay, I would die in the Lord, which for me as a Christian is what it's all about.
Ms. Kolb says she was unaware of the rescue attempt by the Carter administration and did not learn of it until 6 weeks afterwards. She says she was stunned to learn that 8 American soldiers had died trying to rescue her and the other hostages. Through it all, Ms. Kolb says she never gave up hope of being freed and says being taken hostage was simply an occupational hazard. She's still an employee of the U.S. International Communications Agency and lives in New York. From Dothan, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Holmes says the bill would give the Public Service Commission final say-so on the rate-making process, something he says hasn't happened in the last few years.
There's no reason, in my opinion, for the taxpayers to be spending monies for 2 areas in which to hear rate cases and granting these increases. That is with the Public Service Commission and the Alabama Power Company and the Public Service Commission.
Holmes says under the proposed bill, if the PSC denies a utilities request, that utility will have 20 days to file for a rehearing. And if the request is denied a second time, the Supreme Court can review the evidence and determine if the PSC has acted within the law. He says the High Court may then order the PSC to hear the request for a third time. Holmes says during the special session, he'll also introduce a bill that would prohibit a utility from requesting more than 1 rate increase in any calendar year. He says 1 rate increase a year is enough. President of the Alabama Consumers Alliance, Nancy Rawls, says her group supports both bills, which she calls the consumer's last chance to do anything about the utilities. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The report was prepared by the Legislative Fiscal Office at the request of the committee, which is trying to look at education as a whole. The report used available data which compared Alabama's funding to education to that of other states. In elementary secondary education, the report suggests 2 things. First, Alabama spends several $100 million less on its students than do other southern states. But second, there are more state dollars spent on each student than other states. One apparent explanation is that Alabama has a very low local support to schools. The report further suggests that Alabama in turn outspends other southern states in its funding to 2-year colleges. And at the 4-year level, the report suggests that Alabama is just below the regional average per student. One other area that showed Alabama out of line was medical education. The report suggests that Alabama spends almost twice as much on its medical students than other southern states. The one qualifying statement made by the Fiscal Office was that much of the available data wasn't intended for direct comparisons, but it does suggest variances from state to state. The Fiscal Office also cautioned the committee not to take these figures at face value, saying that although Alabama spends less on its elementary students, does their quality of work suffer proportionally? Or, although Alabama apparently spends more on medical education per student, is it because Alabama provides a higher quality medical degree? Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
The National Association of Realtors estimates that over 50% of existing home sales currently employ some means of seller financing. That is, the owner works with the prospective buyer to come up with a method for selling the house that will enable the buyer to make payments and the owner to make a profit. The reasons for the trend toward seller financing are pretty clear. Sharp inflation in housing prices has left many homeowners with substantial equity in their homes, and high interest rates and housing prices have raised the monthly payments on mortgages, making it more difficult to qualify for a conventional loan. These creative techniques are viewed in the marketplace as ways of making the housing transfer easier for both buyer and seller. Realtors see them as ways of assuring sales in a slow market, and lenders see them as profit potential.
As far as the different methods, there's many different methods as there are imagination today. I mean, there's FHA and VA, which the Montgomery realtors are familiar with. There's conventional sources. There's purchase of equity, cash above a mortgage. There's what we call equity financing, which normally is secured by some sort of second or third mortgage. There's the owners carrying the financing. You know, on and on and on.
A survey of realtors in the Southeast indicates that 43% of single-family homes sold in the first quarter of the year involved seller financing with a second mortgage. Most realtors indicated that sellers are charging below-market rates on their loans. While institutions are charging 18% on second mortgages, sellers are financing them for 10 to 15%. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
The chamber has been inadequately housed for a number of years, and we feel like that something's got to give, and this is the best location we found. A considerable study was made of other places, of a freestanding building, renovating an old house somewhere and using it, but we found that this gives us more for probably less money, and it's centrally located. With the tremendous changes that are taking place in downtown Montgomery, we felt this is where we should be. And the fact that it will give us considerably more space, we'll be putting our best foot forward.
Right back down here, so we carry over another week, give the man ample notice, and take it up.
And ask the city clerk to try to
no reason for barricade. I want to see the man make a living.
I have been preached that this place was to where itself. We know what's happened when we have our bill selling around. You know what, everybody knows what.
Right along the side of where the Watcher Hill is.
Don't know what's happened if someone had not passed there and told us that these lights were no,
Because the owner could not use his own name as long as he was operating the store. The police went in, we didn't send them in.
Assumable mortgages, owner equity financing, and wraparound mortgages. These are all creative financing techniques. What is the most frequently used way to buy a house these days?
These days, owner financing is the most frequent. The home where the owner is willing to take a portion of his cash or his equity that he feels like that his home is worth, and then carry the balance for a certain number of years at a certain interest rate normally, or under certain terms and conditions.
The difference between assumable mortgages and owner financing is that the buyer takes over payments on the mortgage as is, with no increase in payments or interest.
Mortgage companies now are involved in doing wraparound mortgages, which they actually loan the money, and the seller of the house would get his entire amount in a lump sum when it closes. There are some owners that desire to carry the mortgage themselves, and some of them carry second mortgages.
The thing to remember about creative financing is that it's not always possible. First, the owner must agree to a method of financing. Second, and probably most important, is the contract must allow for it. If due on sales is written into the contract, then the owner is responsible for the entire loan repayment when he sells his house, precluding any creative financing. In my next report, what due on sales means to a home buyer and what some states are doing to get around the due on sales clause. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Now it makes sense. The greatest teacher of all the centuries. That was the day we took a contract and signed our names, relinquishing all of our rights, all of our material possessions. You chose as a masculine will by faith to become a slave. Many Christians to the church, all of our staff, now numbering almost 15,000, 14,600 or so, come to Christ. Some 11.5 million people registered salvation decisions in Asia alone. I have an increasing burden for over 50 years that our nation was at the point of self-destruction, internally, morally, spiritually, and
our national office hadn't put out any statement as of yet, and personally all I feel is a blatant case of union busting. And I just don't have any comments until we get notification from our national office.
That they ought to cut out waste and fraud in government. There's no question about that. We believe that they ought to... I want to say something about the Democrats in this state and the Democrats nationally. Being out, we believe that they ought to balance the budget. We ought to have a strong national defense. There's no disagreement, I don't think, on the part of most Democrats. I want one I can go in and talk to who talks to me about the problems that the folks who work for a living have. That's the kind of governor I want. I don't want any fellow who buys the election, not this time or the next time or the time after that. Then there's some congressional seats that ought to be ours. And they're in areas where we've got strong labor organizations. And I'm going to encourage you through some meetings I'm going to have with the leadership in this state within organized labor to work hard in your group first and then to join with other groups in this state and build you an organization that'll bring some folks home from Congress and send some up there who will meet with you, who will talk to you, who will be responsive to you.
PSC staff members say their department is one of the few on Capitol Hill that doesn't have a data automation system, but that could change if the commission approves the grant to hire an automation firm to find out what types of computers the PSC needs. The commission's engineering department is spearheading the operation and recommends the VIR Company of Virginia. The engineers say VIR knows the computer needs of regulatory agencies, unlike a local firm, Austin & Associates, another company mentioned. But PSC spokesman Delmer Du Bois says not all staff members are in favor of the computer idea, which he says would be a great help to the commission.
We couldn't just this would fill in for a lot of the staff people that we wouldn't have to have, plus the work could be done a lot quicker on the computer.
Rate Analysis Division Director Yvette Smiley-Smith thinks the computer system is a good idea if it'll benefit the ratepayers.
Certainly I am in favor of data automation. I have some concerns as to the proper way to proceed so that rate making does benefit. As long as those concerns are answered, then I will be in favor of data automation.
All three commissioners say they recognize the need for the computers. They're expected to address the issue at Monday's monthly meeting. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the PSC.
Correction system.
I think you can safely say that certain legislators have made it a practice to represent or try to help people from their district in getting parole.
Prison Commissioner Hopper announced a reorganization of his department. Did his act of reorganization happen as a result of your investigation into the parole and probation scandal?
I don't think Commissioner Hopper could escape but the fact that there needed to be some reorganization. I particularly think that the post of deputy commissioner being abolished was a very wise thing.
The bulk of the governor's proposal remains the same. The governor says he would still like to see some of the money used for construction of elementary and secondary classrooms, renovation and repair of existing mental health facilities, construction of new prison facilities, deepening the Mobile Bay Channel leading to the state docks, and injection of money to spur Alabama housing starts over the next 3 years. But one plan of the governor's to use some of the money to provide local governments with some collateral money for projects of their own fell to the wayside because of what the governor called technical problems in setting up such a public fund. So he's decided on some other projects, including paying